Thank you very much, Mr. Boissonnault. Mr. MacGregor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for appearing before this committee. I wanted to just read out something from the Liberal platform of 2015, where it stated that, and I quote, "Arresting and prosecuting for cannabis offences is expensive for our criminal justice system. It traps too many Canadians in the criminal justice system for minor, non-violent offences." Minister, would you still agree with that statement?
In terms of cannabis.
Like that, the fact that arresting and prosecuting for these offences is expensive for the criminal justice system, that it ties it up. Would you agree with that statement still from the Liberal platform of 2015?
Well, in terms of advancing on the Liberal platform, this is why we have introduced Bill C-45 to legalize, strictly regulate, and restrict access to cannabis in order to keep it out of the hands of kids and the proceeds out of the hands of criminals. We have had much discussion about simply decriminalizing, but simply decriminalizing would not achieve those objectives. That is why we are working extremely hard based on the input of the task force and working with the provinces and territories to ensure we move forward and have a comprehensive regime that in the near future will assist us in achieving those objectives.
And Minister, when I take that as a yes, a long yes. When I've spoken with police forces in local areas like police from Victoria and Saanich on Vancouver Island, and I've asked them about why they are not enforcing marijuana possession offences, charging people for it. They say they have more important things to look at. But when you look at police forces across the country, it's a real patchwork quilt. In other words, the law is not being applied equally, and I don't think it lives up to the standards of a Canadian being a Canadian across this great land of ours. So I'm just wondering, like, with all the costs, interim costs, and I understand you want to keep it out of the hands of children, but your government has admitted many times that it's easier for a teenager to go and get marijuana now on a street corner than it is alcohol or cigarettes. That's a fact. I'm just wondering why your government feels it's still necessary to keep applying criminal law, which you have admitted is unjust, while we wait for legalization to come through. Surely this would be a good gesture to get rid of criminal records, which I think we can all admit do a lot of harm to a person's life in terms of their job prospects, their ability to travel and so on. So I'm just wondering why you just couldn't give direction to prosecutors, to police across this country to make sure that instead of a patchwork quilt, we have equal application of the law.
Well, on the latter question, in terms of criminal records, certainly, and the Prime Minister has indicated this is not within my domain, but the Minister of Public Safety is something that ultimately he will be looking at in terms of the criminal records. But in terms of unequal application of the law, I mean, this is the nature of our federation, and we are, and again I'll underscore, working in a collaborative manner with the provinces and territories. We have taken the time that we deemed necessary to ensure that we got a substantive amount of input from public and health experts, justice, law enforcement, plus the task force on cannabis to help contribute towards the bill that we introduced to get to the place where we can legalize, strictly regulate and restrict access to achieve the objectives that I've reiterated many times, keeping it out of the hands of kids and the proceeds out of the hands of criminals. Until that time, until this piece of legislation receives royal assent, the law is the law, and we respect local law enforcement officers to do their jobs.
Yes, Minister, but I mean, you just said in your statement that the unequal application of the law is the nature of our federation. Surely that is a reason enough for the federal government in the interim to take the appropriate stance to make sure there is an equal application of the law across this country. So again, why haven't you stepped in as an interim measure to do that? Surely it begs the question.
Well, I appreciate your great interest in this and wanting to achieve the objectives that you've very clearly articulated. I would look to you and to all members of this committee and all parliamentarians to move this legislation as quickly as possible through Parliament so we can get to the place where we achieve the objectives that and the purpose that's articulated.
And just as I think my time is getting close here, now the Prime Minister, I think you alluded to, he's mentioned previously that pardons for criminal records is something that might be on the table for marijuana conviction. He has stated that there have been many situations over history when laws come in that overturn previous convictions, and there will be a process for that we will set up in a responsible way. Can you outline to this committee exactly what kind of discussions you've had with the Prime Minister and your colleague, the Minister of Public Safety, in how some sort of a regime for pardons may come about for those who have previous convictions for possession of small amounts of cannabis?
Well, the Minister of Public Safety, the Minister of Health, and myself are entirely focused on ensuring that we move Bill C-45 forward, doing everything we can to work with our counterparts in the provinces and territories to assist them in developing whatever regime they deem appropriate. That has been our focus. There may be a time once we move this legislation forward that we change our focus, but for right now this is the focus, and this is the entirety of the conversations with respect to cannabis that we've been having.
Thank you very much. Mr. Biddle.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Minister.
Delays in the criminal justice system.
Thank you so much. Last question, Mr. MacGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again, Minister. Pleased to have this follow-up. Now, your government has now been in power for nearly 19 months. We had the Jordan decision rendered in the summer of last year. And I agree with you that it's not just appointing judges that will fix the delays in our justice system. There are many different areas. I think the Canadian Bar Association, came out with a top 10 list. I think number 1 was appointing enough judges. I think our criticisms are valid in that it has taken a while to get to this process, and we would urge you to do a bit faster. I mean, 19 months is a fairly long time. But they've also talked about adequately resourcing legal aid, and as you know, that this committee is currently conducting a study on legal aid, and I certainly hope you will listen to our recommendations. But also, one of the biggest ones was resourcing the system. And it's on that particular point I want to concentrate on the resources, because of course courts need a lot of administrative staff. They need the places in which to sit. There are a lot of people involved in making sure that a well-functioning court system is operational. And I think you would agree with me that Canadians need to have faith in our justice system. It's one of the main pillars of our democracy. And I know that you're concerned, as we are, that when serious criminal charges are being stayed or withdrawn, Canadians start to lose faith in that. It's a very real issue. So in light of the resource part, making sure that resources, I want to know from you, from your department, in your opinion, how many resources in our courts and in our police are currently tied up with the crime of cannabis possession? And as a follow-up, does the Department of Justice have any figures on the number of people who have been charged and arrested for minor cannabis possession since your government came to power?
Well, thank you for the last two questions. I don't have those specific answers. I know that once I leave here that public prosecutions will be here. If we don't have the specific answers, we're very happy to do what we can to follow up and provide you with those answers in terms of the resources and in terms of charges. But again, so I'm happy to do that as a short answer to your question. But in terms of resources generally, this is a subject that, on legal aid, I'm very happy to have made additional investments into legal aid.
Cannabis, right? If Jordan is a big problem for our justice decision, like that decision is an issue, like how many of our court resources are being tied up with something that's going to be legalized by your government next year? I mean, wouldn't that be a good fix in the meantime, Minister? That's what I'm trying to get to.
Certainly the Public Prosecution Service would have more, but if you look at the top 10 offences as reported by the Canadian Centre for Justice Statistics, Impaired driving will be number 1 or number 2. Offences, broadly speaking, against the administration of justice will be probably 3 out of the top 5 in all jurisdictions. We will be happy to provide you with further information about simple cannabis possession, but if you want to look at volume, impaired driving is, as I say, number 1 or number 2, and out of the top 10, easily 3 of the top 10 or 3 of the top 5 would be, broadly speaking, offences against the administration of justice. If you look broadly speaking at the elements that are driving delay, there are a variety of those contributing factors. Public Prosecution Service could at least, I'm sure, provide you further information on their prosecution efforts. You'd have to ask RCMP and other police in respect to police resources.
Thank you.
I know the Minister and Mr. Pentney have another engagement.